A man in a white coat once stood in a magazine ad and said, "More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette." That wasn't a joke. That wasn't satire. That was a real advertisement, and for decades it worked. To understand how the world got to a place where doctors were paid to sell cancer, you have to go back further than any advertisement, further than any company, further than the country that made cigarettes famous. You have to go back almost 3,000 years to a jungle in Central America, long before anyone on Earth had a word for addiction. Somewhere in the lowlands of what is now Mexico and Guatemala, the Maya people found a plant with broad green leaves and a sharp, bitter smell. They didn't smoke it the way we think of smoking today. They chewed it, brewed it into drinks, rubbed it on wounds, and burned it in religious ceremonies. To the Maya, tobacco wasn't a habit. It was sacred. Priests believed the smoke carried prayers up to the gods. Healers believed it could pull sickness out of the body. It shows up carved into temple walls and painted onto pottery, always in the hands of someone important: a king, a priest, a healer standing between the human world and the spirit world. For centuries, that's all tobacco was: a ritual, a medicine, a bridge to something larger than one person's own body. Nobody was smoking it on a break at work. Nobody was smoking it out of stress. It was slow, deliberate, and wrapped in meaning. Then, in 1492, a group of sailors on the other side of the ocean got curious. When Columbus landed in the Caribbean, his crew noticed something strange. Local people were rolling dried leaves into bundles, lighting one end, and breathing in the smoke through their mouths. The sailors had never seen anything like it. One of Columbus's men, a sailor named Rodrigo de Jerez, tried it himself. He liked it so much he brought the habit home to Spain, and that's where things took a dark turn for him personally. When his neighbors saw smoke pouring out of his mouth and nose, they assumed he was possessed by the devil. The Spanish Inquisition actually locked him up for it. He may have been the first person in European history imprisoned for smoking a cigarette. But you can't arrest an idea. Word of this strange new plant spread through European ports faster than any single punishment could contain it. Sailors, traders, and explorers carried tobacco seeds back to Spain, then Portugal, then France, then England. Within 100 years, tobacco wasn't just known across Europe, it was wanted across Europe. A French diplomat named Jean Nicot became so convinced tobacco had healing powers that he sent it to the French royal court as a cure for headaches. He was so associated with the plant that scientists later named its addictive chemical after him: nicotine. The man who thought he'd found a miracle cure accidentally gave his name to one of the most addictive substances on the planet. By the 1600s, tobacco had exploded into a full-blown European obsession. Kings taxed it, preachers condemned it. King James I of England hated it so much he wrote an entire pamphlet calling it a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, and dangerous to the lungs. He was right, 400 years too early, and absolutely nobody listened to him. Tobacco was too profitable to ignore, and that profit built something horrifying. In the English colony of Virginia, settlers discovered their soil was perfect for growing tobacco. The problem was labor. Tobacco farming is brutal, repetitive, back-breaking work. Planting, weeding, worming the leaves by hand, hanging them to cure, all under a punishing sun. Just like sugar would later do in the Caribbean, tobacco created a demand for cheap, forced labor that the colonies filled with enslaved Africans. By the 1700s, tobacco was one of the primary economic engines of American slavery. Entire fortunes in Virginia and Maryland were built on the backs of enslaved people who never saw a cent of the wealth their labor created. Some of the wealthiest founding families in early America were, quite literally, tobacco families. For the next 200 years, tobacco stayed mostly the way it had always been: pipes, cigars, chewing tobacco, snuff. Smoking a cigarette specifically, the way we picture it today, was still rare. It was seen as almost feminine, a little bit foreign, something European soldiers picked up from Turkish troops during the Crimean War in the 1850s. Rolling tiny amounts of tobacco into thin paper was slow. A skilled worker could roll maybe 4 cigarettes a minute by hand. That kept cigarettes a niche product, a curiosity, nowhere close to the massive industry it would eventually become. Then, in 1880, a 22-year-old inventor named James Bonsack changed everything. Bonsack built a machine that could roll cigarettes automatically, not 4 a minute, but over 200 a minute. Almost overnight, the bottleneck that had kept cigarettes small and expensive disappeared. A businessman named James Buchanan Duke bought the rights to Bonsack's machine and built an empire around it. Duke didn't just want to sell cigarettes, he wanted to make sure every single person on Earth eventually smoked one. He flooded newspapers with advertisements, gave away free cigarettes to build brand loyalty, and by the 1890s had created what would become the American Tobacco Company, a company so dominant the United States government eventually broke it apart for being an illegal monopoly. This is where the story stops being about a plant and starts being about a machine built specifically to create demand that didn't exist before. Cigarette companies didn't just want customers, they wanted customers who couldn't stop, and they found their biggest opportunity in war. During World War I, tobacco companies donated millions of cigarettes to soldiers overseas, packed right alongside food rations. General John Pershing, commanding American forces in Europe, reportedly said that tobacco was as necessary as the daily ration, that we must have thousands of tons of it without delay. Cigarettes weren't treated as a vice, they were treated as a military necessity, something that calmed nerves and boosted morale in the trenches. An entire generation of young men came home from war already hooked, and the tobacco industry knew exactly what that meant for the decades ahead. By the 1920s and 30s, cigarettes had become deeply embedded in American identity. Movies showed heroes lighting up in moments of tension. Cigarette companies specifically targeted women with new campaigns, framing smoking as an act of independence and liberation. Cigarettes literally marketed as torches of freedom during a 1929 parade designed to break the taboo against women smoking in public. It worked. Female smoking rates climbed for the next several decades. And here's the detail that sounds almost impossible today. Doctors were part of the marketing. Tobacco companies ran advertising campaigns, literally claiming that physicians preferred their specific brand. Camel ran ads boasting that more doctors smoked Camels than any other cigarette, complete with men in white coats holding up a pack like it was a bottle of medicine. Some ads went even further, claiming smoking soothed the throat, aided digestion, even helped with weight control. This wasn't some sketchy back-alley grift. These ads ran in mainstream magazines, endorsed by real medical associations, seen by millions of Americans who trusted what a doctor's coat represented. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the industry already knew something it wasn't telling anyone. As early as the 1950s, internal research inside major tobacco companies was showing clear links between smoking and lung cancer. Independent scientists were reaching the same conclusion, publishing studies connecting cigarette smoke to tumors, heart disease, and a rapidly rising death toll. The tobacco industry's response wasn't to warn the public, it was to organize. In December of 1953, top executives from the major tobacco companies met at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Out of that meeting came a public relations campaign known as the Frank Statement, published as a full-page advertisement in hundreds of newspapers across America. The statement claimed there was no proof that smoking caused disease, promised the industry would fund independent research into the matter, and positioned tobacco companies as partners in protecting public health.
It was almost entirely a lie. The research effort they funded wasn't designed to find the truth. It was designed to create the appearance of scientific debate, where very little debate actually existed. For decades, tobacco companies funded studies specifically built to muddy the water, hired scientists to argue in public that the link between smoking and cancer wasn't settled, and quietly buried their own internal research showing otherwise. It became the blueprint that other industries, including the sugar industry, would later copy almost exactly. Create doubt, fund friendly experts, delay regulation as long as humanly possible, keep the product on shelves and the profits flowing while people kept getting sick. The wall finally started cracking in 1964 when the United States Surgeon General released a report that made global headlines. After reviewing more than 7,000 scientific studies, the report concluded unambiguously that smoking was a direct cause of lung cancer and other serious diseases. For the first time, the American government was telling its citizens, in plain language, that cigarettes were killing them. You'd think that would have ended it. It didn't. Not even close. Cigarette companies adapted instead of retreating. They shifted marketing toward filtered cigarettes, implying filters made smoking safer, even though filters did very little to reduce the actual danger. They leaned harder into cartoon mascots and lifestyle branding, most notoriously with Joe Camel, a cartoon camel character that internal studies later showed was recognized by young children almost as easily as Mickey Mouse. They expanded aggressively into international markets, especially in countries with weaker regulations, targeting entire new generations of smokers in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, just as Western regulations started tightening. Lawsuits piled up through the 1980s and 90s, but tobacco companies had nearly unlimited legal budgets and a simple strategy: bury plaintiffs in paperwork and delay tactics until they ran out of money or gave up. That strategy started collapsing in the mid-1990s when a wave of whistleblowers and leaked internal documents proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that tobacco executives had known about the risks for decades while publicly denying them under oath before Congress. In 1998, the major tobacco companies agreed to the largest civil litigation settlement in American history, a deal worth over $200 billion, paid out to individual states over 25 years to cover the public health costs of treating smoking-related illness. It was a landmark moment, but it came only after tens of millions of people worldwide had already died from a product the companies knew was killing them the entire time. Today, the numbers are almost too large to fully process. Smoking kills more than 8 million people every single year worldwide. More than 7 million of those deaths come from direct tobacco use, and over 1 million more come from secondhand smoke exposure. People who never smoked a single cigarette in their lives, but died from someone else's habit anyway. Smoking remains one of the leading preventable causes of death on the entire planet, responsible for a level of loss that dwarfs most wars, most natural disasters, most pandemics in modern history, spread out quietly across decades instead of arriving all at once. The global picture keeps shifting too, as smoking rates have declined across North America and much of Europe. Thanks to decades of regulation, taxation, and public health campaigns, tobacco companies have leaned even harder into markets across Asia and Africa, where regulations are often weaker and populations are younger and larger. China alone is now home to more smokers than the next several highest countries combined. The industry that got caught lying to Americans simply moved its playbook to wherever the doors were still open. And just as the industry seemed to be facing real, permanent decline in the West, it found a new product to reinvent itself around: vaping. E-cigarettes were originally marketed as a safer alternative for adult smokers trying to quit. But sleek designs, fruit and candy flavors, and social media marketing pulled in an entirely new generation of teenagers who had never smoked a traditional cigarette in their lives. Public health officials watched nicotine addiction rates in teenagers spike for the first time in years, driven almost entirely by vaping. Regulators have scrambled ever since to catch up, banning certain flavors, restricting sales, and investigating marketing practices that, to a lot of researchers, look uncomfortably familiar to tactics used decades earlier. Some governments have pushed back hard. Countries like Australia have raised tobacco taxes so aggressively that a single pack can cost the equivalent of dozens of dollars, specifically to price young people out of starting the habit. Plain packaging laws in multiple countries strip cigarette packs of any branding, replacing logos with graphic warning images of diseased lungs and rotting teeth. Public smoking bans have spread through restaurants, bars, offices, and airports across most of the developed world, something that would have seemed unthinkable to someone smoking freely on an airplane back in the 1970s. It's worked, to a point. Smoking rates in many wealthy countries have fallen to their lowest levels in generations. But globally, more than 1 billion people still smoke today, and the tobacco industry still generates hundreds of billions of dollars in profit every single year, even after everything that's been exposed, even after everything that's been proven in court. 3,000 years ago, tobacco was a sacred plant, chewed slowly and burned in ceremonies meant to connect people to something greater than themselves. Somewhere between a Spanish sailor's curiosity and a machine that could roll 200 cigarettes a minute, it turned into one of the most profitable and most deadly products ever created by human hands. It funded empires. It fueled slavery. It armed soldiers in 2 world wars. It fooled generations of doctors, regulators, and everyday people who trusted what they were told. And it is still, right now, sitting in gas stations and convenience stores on nearly every street corner on Earth, waiting for the next person to light the first one. If this kind of deep dive into the hidden history behind everyday things is something you're into, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment and let me know what product you want to see covered next. And if you learned something new today, a like really does help this channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.